You're listening to China Manufacturing Decoded from the Sofeast Group. Hi, welcome back to the pod, episode 281 today. Adrian here, Renaud joins me, and we are going to be diving into a very timely topic. We're recording this on actually July the 3rd, and coming out of the States, they've just announced, I think in the evening of July the 2nd, that a new trade deal has been agreed between Vietnam and the United States. So really want to dig into that here, Renaud. This is important news for a lot of importers and no doubt many of our listeners as well.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So I think let's go back. So Trump arrives in the White House. He loves tariffs. He loves the ability to find a way to enact tariffs without approval from the Congress. And he goes nuts with it. And he prepares some weird so-called reciprocal tariffs and announces them on, when was that? April the 2nd, I guess? And
Liberation Day.
Yeah, right. And he makes a big fuss, but also creates a big mess and has to backpedal and say that, hey, let's just suspend that. Let's just keep 10% on anything that arrives into the US, except if it's from China, like an extra 10% on what was before, except for China, which had much higher tariffs because they had dared to actually reciprocate on the so-called reciprocal tariffs. But he said that this would be for 90 days, right? So we are getting close to the end of these 90 days. And they've done some deals with your country and China, and that's about it so far, right? Until today. So what did Mr. Trump announce today?
Well, you mentioned Liberation Day, so April the 2nd, 2025. Should we really refer to it as Liberation Day? How silly. Anyway,
Tariff Day.
On that day, I think if you recall, he put all the percentage of tariffs on a board next to the country names, and Vietnam had a 46% duty put on it. That was like the threat. Now we all know that didn't transpire, right? Now between now and basically early July, they've clearly worked on and agreed this particular deal. So as it stands, 20% tariff on most Vietnamese exports to the US. So obviously that's lower than the original 46. No tariffs on US exports to Vietnam. I was reading one article, I think from CNBC, and it quoted President Trump, and he was talking about how great it will be to export lots of large engine SUVs to Vietnam, which I don't know if he's ever been to Vietnam. I'm sure you have, and many of our listeners have. If you go to Vietnam and see the roads, and there's lots of scooters and bikes and people, and it's pretty crazy. I mean, I personally, big American trucks and SUVs, they're going to be great there. But anyway, no tariffs on US exports to Vietnam, including the SUVs. I do think that's relevant, though, because we can talk a little bit later about the kinds of US exports that actually Vietnam might start bringing in more of. And I'm thinking more from a, industrial and manufacturing sense. And Vietnam lifting tariffs and boosting the purchase of US goods alongside protections for IP and improved land labor standards. I think that's kind of general. The US likes to try to push developing countries to have, better human rights or labor standards or protecting IP. So I guess this is probably a normal demand. And then an important one, and this is something I'm interested to get your opinion on, 40% on goods deemed to be transshipped. So those are products originally from other countries which are routed through Vietnam. And look, we all know we're talking about Chinese products here, or products with a lot of Chinese components, right? So from a strategic point of view, I think there's a few points to be made. But first, let's talk about that sort of transshipment penalty.
Well, in theory, so a lot of companies have been organizing the transshipment, which means the product is actually made in China, it goes to Vietnam, maybe it's repackaged, or there's very, very minimal transformation or no transformation at all of the product, and then ship it out as a made in Vietnam product, and then they use to escape, sometimes 25, 35% tariffs. And that was very common, let's say from 2018, 2019 to 2024. And obviously the US Customs and Border Protection Agency is not dumb. They know it happens, but it's not very easy to check, so many shipments arriving in the USA. But it's a massive fraud, and companies escape very high tariffs. All right. So they want to put pressure on Vietnam so that they kind of catch these issues also. They help curtail it. All right. Okay, so now they say 20% on what is really made in Vietnam and 40% on what is transshipped. How exactly are they going to see, because when it's transshipped, they don't say, oh, by the way, this is not made in Vietnam, right? So
No.
how are they going to legitimize, oh, this is really made in Vietnam, right? Are companies going to have to ask for a certificate of origin Vietnam? Does it even mean something? Because in different countries, the requirements are different. And let's say the ease of getting it from the local government or a chamber of commerce or something like that, varies considerably from country to country.
Yeah.
And I'm not an expert in that topic for Vietnam, but yeah, how to know if this is a 20% or 40% kind of product, right? Is it really made in Vietnam versus transshipped? Because nobody says, oh, this is transshipped. What is transshipped? It's for a reason, is to pretend that it's made in Vietnam, right? So I guess the USA required maybe Vietnam to police things a bit more tightly, and maybe they are going to require certain kind of certificates, something like that, or some kinds of official recognition and confirmation. Verification, basically. It has to be verified that there's at least that much local content and so on and so forth. So we have no idea until we know the details, basically.
Yes.
Right? What is the policy going to be?
Enforcement seems like that's going to be a big challenge and a big issue.
Yeah.
I'm not convinced that the Trump administration will, at this point, have put in place some kind of solid enforcement framework or process, other than just saying, we want to clamp down on transshipped products because we don't want China using this loophole to get products into the US. And that's their will, that's their objective. But in reality, how are they going to actually enforce this on the ground? I think it's fair to say that we don't know at the moment. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there is some clear framework in place, but I have my doubts at this point.
Right. We'll see, basically. We'll see what exactly they say. We'll see if they come out with detailed explanation or some, I don't know, statements of some principles, a certain logic that they will follow. We'll see. We'll see. The US Customs and Border Protection already has their own logic. Is it substantial transformation? Yes or no? If there's no substantial transformation in Vietnam, then Vietnam is not the country of origin. If all the parts come from China and then someone in Vietnam just assembles them quickly with a screwdriver, well, the country of origin is China. So that's already out there. Okay. So what I'm guessing is that by transshipment, they say anything that is not really, for which Vietnam is not the country of origin, meaning that there's not substantial transformation. But in that case, they might have some special requirements. We'll see. We'll see. So this is for Vietnam, and then when you look at all the countries around, Cambodia is in a relatively similar situation. It's a smaller country, is very, very dominated by, Chinese businesses, let's say. A lot of manufacturing organized by Chinese businesses there. Very, very dependent on exports to USA. So they're probably very eager to strike a deal also. But how to say? Yeah, let's see. Let's see. They had a temporary 49% tariff, which is which was the highest, because they have such a trade surplus with the USA, right? They don't buy much from the USA, but they sell a lot to the USA. And
Yes.
again, there was a lot of transshipment. So we'll see when the 90 days expire. I would guess that Trump is going to say, at the last moment, is going to say, he's going to threaten, you guys are going up to 25, 30, 40% soon. And then, okay, I give you, 15 days, and let's try to to finalize the deals in the next 15 days, and then maybe again another 15 days. That's what he did for Mexico and Canada, right?
Well, I think the deadline from the day in April that they put in a lot of tariffs is about July the 9th. So from a political perspective, it's advantageous to announce deals before that, because then they can say to the American public, well, look, we're getting these deals done. We're mission accomplished.
Right.
So you may be right. Before July the 9th, perhaps they're now going to start announcing more deals with countries like Cambodia, for example, once this domino has fallen. I mean, from another political standpoint, it's kind of, it remains to be seen whether it's definitely a coup, but it will be marketed as a coup because you get somebody who cooperates fairly closely with China in some ways, Vietnam, but then you're drawing them closer to you instead. So free access to the Vietnamese market, lower tariffs on Vietnam than other neighboring countries. And we all know that from a political standpoint, the US wants to gain more of a foothold in the Asia Pacific region, so becoming a closer kind of ally economically with Vietnam makes a lot of sense. And will more Southeast Asian countries come in? It's possible. Absolutely. I think if you're an American importer, is this good news if you're buying from Vietnam? Sure, because now instead of wondering, well, what's the tariff going to be? You're now, that it's guaranteed. Well, once the deal is completely ratified and rubber stamped, it's going to be 20%. So from a business perspective, you can plan for that, I guess, a lot easier, right?
Yes. But again, you might have some questions about what exactly is the requirement to avoid being considered, transshipping. And I go back again to the historical context here. It was, about 3 months ago. I think it came from the Treasury Secretary, Besant. He was trying to find ways to get countries basically to avoid buying everything from China, right? So they have this analysis of countries like Vietnam and Cambodia as, what was the term? I forgot the term, but basically ways for China goods to flow into the USA with less tariffs, right?
Yeah.
And like connector, I think it was connector countries or something like that. And they started to put pressure on countries, Vietnam, Malaysia, etc., saying, hey, want to make a deal, a part of it will be, show us how you will buy less stuff from China, especially for the goods that you send to us. We don't want it to be, 80%, 90% full of of parts made in China. Okay. And then Beijing really, like publicly denounce that and say, hey, be very careful if you try to do these kind of things. That they were quite unhappy with it. All right. Well, Vietnam is also quite careful not to anger Beijing too much because they also depend on Beijing for some investments in various things like train infrastructure and a bunch of things. And anyway, he's the big neighbor, right? You don't want to anger them too much. So I think this whole idea of, okay, if it's transshipping 40%, okay, then if you read that and you're in Beijing, you're like, yeah, okay, well, transshipping was never really allowed anyway. So now it's, what does that mean? It means that if any product is subject to, let's say, 50% tariff, if it's made in China, then you just transship it, like physically move it to Vietnam. I don't know, repackage it or something, change the label, say made in Vietnam and ship it, then you only pay 40%. Like this even nearly sounds like a good deal, if you don't think too much.
Would it be 40% plus then the
And that's
regular
the
Chinese
question.
tariff?
Again, we don't know.
Because yeah,
It seems like it doesn't. But I have no idea because we don't know the details. As usual, these kind of things come up on Twitter or something like that. And we're like, okay, so what exactly does that mean? And I need to wait for very clear well, guidelines, right? And usually in the Wall Street Journal, like 1 or 2 days after, they'll be able to speak to senior people who will clarify things. But most other newspapers still remain very general. And, people read it and they're quite confused. So, yeah, let's see. Let's wait basically to see the details. But I think what they say as transshipment here is a little bit more than what we were calling transshipment until now.
Yes, I mean, this is one of the big issues here. And if you are planning to source from Vietnam or you are already, then there's definitely some good news here. But the potential crackdown on transshipment, if your products have Chinese components but they're coming out of Vietnam, does this give you a lot of pause to think about what the benefits are? Maybe. And again, this will become clearer once this gets up and running. Also, we don't know how China might retaliate. I mean, could they retaliate against Vietnam and add some sort of a penalty for anything that's going into Vietnam, which of course, adds to your costs if you're the one that's sourcing out of Vietnam? It's possible. It's possible, and I'm sure that we'll hear more about it fairly soon.
And another big topic here is that this might be a sign of what is to come for other Southeast Asian countries and South Asian countries, right?
Yeah.
So you have a bunch of countries. When you look at their exports to USA, and you compare that with their imports from China, you see that the growth is kind of hand in hand, right? They buy more and more parts from China and they sell more and more finished products to USA. So over time, more and more of their manufacturing is we just transform, and finished products with parts from China, we ship to USA, right? So it's Vietnam, it's Cambodia, as I mentioned. It's also, to a certain extent, Malaysia, maybe a little bit less, but let's not forget Thailand and Indonesia. Actually, Indonesia is a big one. A lot of Chinese influence over there when it comes to manufacturing, investment, and so on. And a little bit India too, right? India, a lot of electronic manufacturers are making products that are then shipped to the USA. Apple is working very hard on that to accelerate the plans, but they are far from being the only ones, right? So all of these countries might have some kind of might have a strong pressure, let's say, from the USA to do something like this. Okay, if you agree on a high rate on what is really transshipping, then we'll give you a lower rate. Otherwise, why would we give you a low rate, And especially in places like India. India is not going to say, okay, our market is totally open, you can export anything you want. They would never do that. Like for agricultural products, that would devastate their, let's say, the rural areas and all the little subsistence farmers and everything. If suddenly they start to buy whatever soy, corn, and a lot of agricultural products from USA that are made in industrial quantities with industrial methods, well, it's no longer subsistence farming; it's starvation farming. So they're not going to be able to sell their products anymore. Right. So some countries like that are going to have trouble negotiating a good deal, I'm afraid. So we'll see. It's a very complicated topic, but I think they have to make a deal with China quick because this will, 100%, 200% tariff problem was really blocking everything. Right. Like too many companies were complaining. It was brutal. Okay. That had to be addressed as early as possible. So it's not really a deal, right? It's just a framework. Okay. And then China is taking their time to lift some export controls and so on, as we discussed last time.
Yeah.
Then the UK was very eager to get something going just because uncertainty is really killing, economic investment and so on. Okay. And then they have Vietnam. And then I guess they want to show that to, again, Cambodia, Malaysia, Thailand, India, Indonesia, and say, hey, guys, that's kind of the model, right? You guys are going to have to do something like that.
It doesn't surprise me that they want that free access to the Vietnamese market for American exports as well, because it's been a bugbear of the administration that they have this trade deficit. Yeah. So they want to be selling more American stuff. They want to get more American stuff exported. So I wouldn't be surprised if that is a request for future trade deals with other countries as well. Whether it's successful or not, I don't know. But yeah, it doesn't surprise me.
Oh, for sure. For sure. They want that country to import more from the USA specifically, of course. Yes, of course.
Okay, so that's covered it as deeply as we can. There's plenty of online resources out there, and I'll leave a link to a number of them. I guess if you're currently importing from Vietnam to the States, we would leave you with the thoughts about making sure that you are really able to answer questions about how transformed your product has been in Vietnam when you're coming to export it into the States. If it gets to customs and you're being asked about this because they are suspecting it of being transshipped, and if you don't want to get hit with high tariffs, you're going to need to be able to provide that evidence. Now, exactly how you do that, I don't know, because it's going to be on a case-by-case basis, but I guess that's an important thing to consider, right?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So this is one to keep an eye on, but because it's just been announced and we do have customers, listeners, and if you're just coming to the podcast new, people who are interested in this topic, we thought we'd better cover it quickly. If it changes and we learn more, then we will record again and update you all. But thanks, Renaud, for digging into that. I think an important topic that everybody needs to know about, so good to get it out there.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks again for listening to this podcast, brought to you by the Sofeast Group. We're on a mission to provide you with everything you need to manufacture effectively in Asia, including inspections, auditing, new product development support, contract manufacturing, 3PL warehousing and fulfillment, and much, much more across Asia's key manufacturing areas. Visit us at sofeast.com, that's SOFEAST.com, to learn more and get help. If you've enjoyed the podcast today, please do rate, review, and share, because it will really help others discover us too.